It was supposed to be a normal Thanksgiving dinner, but it turned into the most terrifying night of my life. I really needed the cash, so I went to thank my grandfather for the $200 check I thought he sent. He froze mid-carve and looked at me with pure fear in his eyes. He swore he never sent me a dime. Instead, he admitted he wired $500,000 to a stranger. Then he finished his sentence about who that money was really for, and my blood turned to ice. The old, beat-up car looked completely out of place in this pristine neighborhood. David Miller pulled his rusty sedan into the long, paved driveway. He admired the massive suburban home that belonged to his grandfather. It had been months since his last visit, and the house looked bigger than he remembered. The engine sputtered loudly as he cut the ignition. He took a brief moment to check his appearance in the rearview mirror. He reached over to the passenger seat and retrieved the bottle of wine he had purchased earlier. It was an expensive vintage, meant to impress his grandfather. David stepped out of the car and smoothed down his shirt. He walked briskly toward the front entrance, eager to get out of the cold. The wind bit at his face as he navigated the walkway. He paused briefly at the heavy door before reaching out to ring the doorbell. The heavy wooden door swung open almost immediately after the chime sounded. His grandfather stood there, dressed in his Sunday best, with a welcoming smile on his face. He pulled David inside and offered him a firm handshake. The warmth of the house was a stark contrast to the chilly air outside. David returned the grip, feeling a sense of relief to be indoors. His grandfather patted him on the shoulder and gestured for him to enter. David removed his coat and followed the older man down the hallway. They entered the formal dining room where the table was beautifully set. The rest of the family was already waiting for them. David offered a polite wave to his cousins and aunts. The room smelled of roasted turkey and sage stuffing. He took a deep breath, enjoying the familiar sense of the holiday. It seemed like the perfect setting for a family reunion. Everyone settled into their assigned chairs around the large mahogany table. His grandfather stood at the head holding the carving knife and fork. The turkey looked perfectly cooked, with golden brown skin. The room went quiet as everyone waited for the carving to begin. David watched his grandfather sharpen the knife against the steel rod. The sound rang out clearly in the silent room. It was finally time to start the Thanksgiving meal. Before the food was served, David decided it was the right time to speak up. He poured cool water from a crystal pitcher into his glass. He took a sip to calm his nerves, and then cleared his throat loudly. The sound echoed slightly, causing several family members to look his way. He wanted to make sure everyone heard his gratitude. He placed the glass down and turned his body slightly toward the head of the table. He locked eyes with the elderly man at the head of the table. David spoke clearly, thanking him for the $200 check he had received in the mail. He explained how much the extra money helped with his bills. A smile played on his lips as he expressed his appreciation. He assumed his grandfather would nod or acknowledge the gift. It was a simple gesture, but one that David felt needed public recognition. His grandfather froze mid-motion, the knife hovering just above the turkey breast. The older man stared at David with a look of pure confusion. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a furrowed brow. The room grew uncomfortably quiet as the family noticed the reaction. David felt his own smile falter under that intense gaze. He wondered if he had said something wrong. The silence stretched on for several awkward seconds. The old man lowered the knife slowly to the platter. He shook his head from side to side and spoke in a low, serious tone. He insisted that he had never sent any money to David recently. He was adamant that he had not mailed a check for $200. David felt a wave of confusion wash over him. He was certain the check had come from his grandfather. The denial made absolutely no sense. David reached into his pocket to prove his point to the room. He retrieved the folded piece of paper and smoothed it out. He placed the physical check directly onto the crisp white tablecloth near his grandfather's plate. The family leaned in, curious to see the evidence. David pointed to the signature at the bottom of the check. It clearly bore his grandfather's name. He waited for the older man to recognize his own handwriting. His grandfather reached out and picked up the small slip of paper. As soon as his fingers touched it, his demeanor changed completely. His hands began to tremble violently, shaking the paper in the air. His face went pale, draining of all color. It looked as if he had seen a ghost. David took a step back, alarmed by the sudden physical reaction. The man stared at the check with wide, terrified eyes. Without warning, the old man lunged forward toward his grandson. He grabbed David firmly by the arm, his grip surprisingly strong. He dragged David forcefully away from the large dining room windows. Chairs scraped loudly against the floor as they moved. David struggled to keep his balance during the sudden maneuver. The family gasped in shock at the aggressive behavior. His grandfather did not let go, pulling him toward the safety of the interior walls. David tripped over his own feet as he was hauled into the hallway. The windowless corridor offered cover from the outside world. He tried to pull his arm free, but the grip remained tight. Confusion and panic started to rise in his chest. He demanded to know what was happening. His grandfather leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. The festive atmosphere of the dinner had completely evaporated in a matter of seconds. His grandfather looked him in the eye, his voice trembling with fear. He explained that the $200 check was a trap. He stated it was likely a lure, designed to confirm David's physical location. Someone wanted to know exactly where David was at this moment. The check was the mechanism to draw him out. David felt a chill run down his spine at the explanation. The check was never a gift. David peered around the corner back into the dining room. His family remained frozen in their seats, too stunned to move. Absolute silence filled the space where laughter had been moments ago. They looked at each other with fearful expressions. No one dared to pick up a fork or take a drink. The turkey sat cooling on the platter, forgotten. The fear in the room was palpable and contagious. His grandfather released David's arm and sprinted toward the front entrance. He reached the heavy wooden door and immediately threw the deadbolts. He engaged all 3 locks, checking them twice to ensure they were secure. The clicking sounds echoed loudly in the quiet house. He pressed his back against the door, panting with exertion. It was clear he was trying to keep something or someone out. The home had become a fortress. David understood he needed to help secure the house immediately. He rushed into the kitchen and flipped the light switches. The room plunged into darkness, making the house appear empty from the outside. He crouched low, staying beneath the level of the countertops. Shadows lengthened across the floor as the sun began to set outside. He waited for his grandfather to give the next order. The darkness felt safer than the light. The older man returned to the hallway and moved to the peephole. He grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from a side table. He held it tightly like a club, ready to use it for protection. He pressed one eye to the small glass lens in the door. He scanned the driveway and the street beyond. His breathing was ragged as he watched for any movement. The candlestick shook slightly in his grip. David crawled closer and whispered to his grandfather in the dark. He asked who exactly was coming for them. The older man did not answer the question. Instead, he pulled back his sleeve and checked his wristwatch anxiously. He tapped the glass face of the watch, counting the seconds. It seemed like he was waiting for a specific time. David felt his frustration growing alongside his fear. He needed answers immediately. They remained standing in the dark hallway for several long minutes. The silence was deafening as they strained to hear any noise from outside. Every creak of the house sounded like a potential intruder. The wind howled against the siding, making them both jump. David watched the shadows shift on the walls. He could hear the rapid beating of his own heart. The waiting was becoming unbearable. Finally, his grandfather turned away from the door to face David. The older man took a deep, shuddering breath to steady his voice. He looked older and more frail in the dim light. Tears welled up in his eyes as he prepared to speak. He placed a hand on David's shoulder, squeezing it gently. It was time to tell the truth about the situation. The secret could no longer be kept. He confessed that he had recently wired a massive sum of money. He admitted sending $500,000 to a complete stranger. The admission hung heavy in the air between them. David stared at him, unable to comprehend the amount. The grandfather explained that the transaction was done out of desperation. He had depleted his savings to make the payment. It was a dangerous game he had been playing. The old man began to sob openly as he continued his story. He revealed that the money was paid to a professional hitman. This assassin had been hired by a rival to kill David. The grandfather's voice cracked with emotion as he spoke the words. He grabbed David's shirt, pulling him closer. The reality of the threat crashed down on David. His life was the target of a contract killer. He explained that he paid the large sum to buy David's life. He hoped to outbid the person who wanted David dead. The assassin had demanded the money in exchange for canceling the contract. The grandfather had acted to save his grandson from certain death. He begged David to understand why he had done it. It was a desperate attempt to protect his family. He had risked everything to keep David safe. David slumped back against the wall, his legs giving out. The realization of his grandfather's words finally settled over him. He looked at the old man who had sacrificed his fortune. The house was dark, but the danger felt very real. He understood now why the check was a trap. His life had been bought and paid for. The Thanksgiving dinner was over, and survival was the only thing that mattered now.